Hello everyone, it's Fan01 here, and welcome back to part 2 of my second Storytime video. We are going to be carrying on reading another 3 chapters of Wallace and Gromit, A Matter of Loaf and Death. So I hope you enjoy the second part of this video. And I will just go to chapter 4. So here we go. Chapter 4. Until we meet again. In the bakery the next day, Gromit was working hard as usual, while Wallace was creating a little sculpture of paella from a cottage loaf. He was singing the baker-like jingle and sighing a great deal. "Fancy that, Gromit," he said for the 5th time. "It's not every day you meet the girl of your dreams, is it, lad?" Gromit rolled his eyes. Wallace was acting like a lovesick puppy, and he wanted him to snap out of it. There was work to be done. At that moment the doorbell rang. Wallace was taken aback when he opened the door to find Paella and Fluffles standing there. "We were just passing by, going for a walk, and Fluffles insisted on dropping in, hoping you would join us," Paella explained. "Please say yes, she'd be so disappointed. Wouldn't you, Fluffles?" Fluffles looked up at Wallace. She didn't look as if she'd be disappointed. "Wouldn't you, Fluffy?" Paella repeated, giving Fluffles a little nudge with her foot. Fluffles jumped up with a start. She began to pull on Wallace's trouser leg. Goodness, thought Wallace, maybe she would be disappointed. He was touched, but then he always knew he had a way with dogs. "Oh well," said Wallace, "if you insist, but I'm in me work things." Paella chuckled. "I like a man in uniform." The combined charms of Paella and Fluffles had worked perfectly on Wallace. "Manage without me, won't you, lad?" he shouted to Gromit, then disappeared out the door. Gromit was left alone again, with a list of jobs to do and no one to help him. And that's how things continued. Every day Paella turned up with another plan for the day: feeding the ducks, going to the fun fair, punting along the canal, tango lessons. Wallace was enjoying the attention and the female company. He couldn't believe the baker-like girl, the girl of his dreams, was suddenly in his life and interested in him. Every morning he left the house without a thought for his faithful pal Gromit, who was left to run the bakery single-handedly. When Wallace and Paella returned home after their fun-filled days, they dumped their coats on Gromit and expected him to make the tea. But the real test of Gromit's patience came in the evenings, when they kept him awake with their laughter and chatter. Even pulling a pillow over his head didn't help. Nevertheless, Gromit still got up at the crack of dawn to bake and deliver the bread to the top-rung customers. He could never have anticipated what was about to happen next. Chapter 5. A Woman's Touch. Gromit was returning from his delivery round one morning when he noticed the dustbin was overflowing with stuff. On inspection he realised that it was all his stuff. His precious collection of records, his much-loved books, his Beagle comics and his favourite toys. Puzzled and cross, Gromit walked into the house. The first thing he saw was a photo of Wallace, Paella and Fluffles hanging on the wall. Then he heard Wallace's voice behind the door. "Oh, it makes a change, doesn't it, my fudge cake?" said Wallace. "Gromit's going to love this." Wallace couldn't have been more mistaken. When Gromit pushed open the door, he looked around. Stunned by what he saw, he barely recognised the place. There were vases of flowers everywhere, and the room was spotlessly clean, not a crumb on the floor or a dog's hair on the cushions. Wallace was tucking into a big plate of bangers and mash. He looked up and smiled at Gromit, who returned the look. But his expression was far from happy. First he looked confused, then hurt, and finally very cross indeed. What on earth was going on? I thought you could do with a woman's touch around the house," said Paella. "You naughty, slovenly boys." "What do you think, Gromit?" asked Wallace with a mouthful of mash. "Wouldn't You wouldn't know it was our place, would you, lad? Gromit glared at him for a moment and then turned round and retreated upstairs to his bedroom. But even there he couldn't find sanctuary. Opening his bedroom door was just as much of a shock as opening the door downstairs. He had forgotten about the dustbin full of his stuff, but now he saw that Pyla had been tidying his room, too. Everything was neatly arranged, and anything that didn't have a place had been thrown away. There were pretty cushions on the bed, and a vase full of flowers on his bedside table. Furious, Gromit grabbed the flowers and threw them in the bin. How dare she? There was a knock on his door. Gromit stopped in his tracks and then quickly grabbed the flowers out of the bin and popped them back into the vase. He didn't want Pyla to see what he really thought of her bedroom makeover. However, to his surprise, when he opened the door, it wasn't Pyla standing there, it was Fluffles. She was carrying a box containing stuff she had rescued from the dustbin. She held it out to him as if it were a peace offering. Gromit eyed her suspiciously, but then something about her made him relax. Maybe it was because she was a dog, maybe it was because she was a pretty dog, but more likely it was because she seemed to understand, which was more than Wallace did. Gromit took the box gratefully and their paws touched for an instant. It was like an electric shock for both of them. Fluffles drew back and Gromit looked away bashfully. His eyes fell on his puppy love record in the box. How embarrassing to own something so soppy. He blushed and shrugged. Fluffles chuckled. She thought it was sweet that Gromit liked romantic music. All the other dogs she'd met were just into street sounds and howling. "Fluffles!" came Pyla's call from downstairs. "Where are you? Time we were off." Alarm flashed across Fluffles' face and she rushed off without looking back. And we've reached chapter 6. Gromit discovers a terrible secret. "Love is a many splendid thing, Gromit," said Wallace, yawning, "but it doesn't half tire you out." He was about to go up to bed when he noticed Pyla's purse on the stairs. "Oh, heck," he said. "Pyla's purse! I must return it forthwith." Wallace opened the front door to discover it was tipping down with rain. He hesitated. On second thoughts, maybe it was a bit late and he was very tired. "Gromit!" he called. So it was Gromit who headed out into the rain, which got heavier and heavier as he drove towards Pyla's house. When he got out of the van, it had turned into a nasty thunderstorm. Gromit looked up at the large and forbidding mansion. There were no lights in the windows, and none of the warm glow that emanates from most houses at night. The building looked abandoned, and perhaps it was, thought Gromit when he found the front door slightly open. Summoning up his courage, he peered inside to see if there was any sign of life. What he saw made him feel uneasy. The hallway was grand, but sparsely furnished, and it looked dark and eerie. There were no flowers in vases or happy pictures on the walls. Surely this couldn't be Pyla's home. Gromit noticed a thin crack of light underneath one of the doors leading off from the hall. He was about to go in, when he looked again at the dark corners of the hallway, wondering if something or someone was lurking there, waiting for him to enter the house. He strained his eyes, willing them to get used to the dark. Then a bolt of lightning flashed overhead and lit everything up for a second. All it revealed was just more emptiness. Gromit weighed up the choices in his mind. If this wasn't Pyla's house, what was he walking into? And if it was, why was it so spooky and unwelcoming? But Gromit had a job to do, so he gently tiptoed across the hallway towards the light and the faint sound of a TV. Just as he was about to knock on the door, another crash of thunder made Gromit leap out of his skin. The lightning flash had lit up a room upstairs and cast shadows on the walls. They were not normal shadows. It looked as if the room was full of people, but there was no noise and no movement. In fact, it looked as if the room was full of bakers in their bakers' hats. There was another lightning flash, and yet again baker-shaped shadows were cast on the walls. Fearful but puzzled, Gromit had to investigate. Something was not right. Really not right. He crept up the stairs towards the room. Gromit's eyes widened when he peered in through the door. The chamber was full of wooden tailor's dummies arranged around a large bed. Each dummy was wearing a baker's hat, an apron, and had a number stuck to its face. Gromit glanced from one dummy to another. The numbers went up to 12, but there was a 13th dummy in the corner with no apron, no hat, and no number. With the storm raging outside, the shadows and the wind made the dummy seem ghostly, almost like the living dead. Gromit's eyes fell on a big red album on the dressing table. Putting down Piler's purse, he opened the cover slowly. On the first page, underneath a big number, 1, there was a picture of Piler with a man in a baker's hat. The label underneath read "Pato Cake," and someone had drawn a big red cross over the man's face. Gromit's mind was racing. So this was Piler's house, but what did everything mean? He turned round to look at tailor's dummy number 1. He looked back at the album and turned the page to see baker number 2 with Piler. His name was Ken Wood, a chef, and he too had a red cross drawn over his face. Page after page showed pictures of Piler with bakers. Crusty rolls, pita bread, shorty shortcake, weighing scales, all crossed out. But it was when Gromit got to baker number 12 that his suspicions were confirmed. Gromit recognised this baker from the front page of the Daily Grind. It was Baker Bob, who had been battered to death with his own rolling pin. Shaking, Gromit turned the page to number 13. Staring out at him was Wallace, beaming with happiness next to Piler. The only difference was that Wallace's face had not been crossed through. Gromit looked round at the 13th tailor's dummy. Then he looked back at the photograph. His nose went dry and his hackles went up. There was now no doubt in his mind. Wallace was going to be Piler's 13th victim. Piler was the serial killer. Gromit reeled back and knocked into one of the tailor's dummies. It toppled over, knocking into another. One by one they all fell like dominoes and clattered to the floor. The door downstairs opened. Piler had heard the noise and was starting to climb the stairs. Gromit looked round in a panic. Where could he hide? As Piler entered her bedroom, she turned on the light. She cast her eyes over the room, but everything looked fine. She was confused. She definitely heard a noise, but nothing was out of place. Gromit had worked like a dog to get everything back in position, but where was he now? "That's funny," Piler said to Fluffles, who had followed her up the stairs. "I'm sure I heard something." Then she looked over at the dressing table. The album was still open. Would that give Gromit away? "Oh, there it is," she said, closing the album and picking up the purse that Gromit had left there. "It must have been there all along." And with that she relaxed and got ready for bed. Meanwhile Fluffles remained confused. Her doggy senses told her that something wasn't quite right. She looked under the bed but found nothing. "Fluffles," barked Piler, "stop dithering around and go to bed. Big day tomorrow. Our final baker is nicely buttered up." Piler put her dressing gown away in the wardrobe. As she closed the door, as if she had looked, she would have seen Gromit reflected in the mirror. He was on the ceiling, stretched out on the wheel-shaped light, and clinging on with super canine strength. Luckily, Piler turned away from the mirror. Fluffles, however, didn't. She saw Gromit, but to his amazement she didn't give him away. She just crawled into her rather plain little bed, and when Piler turned off the light, they both went to sleep. Unfortunately for Gromit, in his haste he had chosen the worst place in the room to hide. The light was right above Piler's bed, so there was no way of getting down without waking her up. He was stuck there until morning, and even then she might notice him. As the lightning flashed, Gromit could do nothing but watch Piler snore beneath him. It was almost as loud as the thunder outside. He knew that if he gave in his needs for sleep, he would fall right on top of Piler. He had to keep himself awake, somehow. Wallace has converted his house into a windmill, cracking sails, especially if you forget to duck. It's a bad time for bakers, with a serial killer on the loose. It's love at first sight for Wallace when the Bakelite girl crossed the horizon. It's a dog's life for Gromit, working all hours in the bakery while Wallace moons about with Paella. Who could resist this vision of loveliness? It takes courage for Gromit to go to Paella's house alone. Tea time goes with a bang when Paella provides the cake. And finally, at the touch of a paw, electricity sparks between Gromit and Fluffles. And so we have reached Chapter 7, as of course I have read Chapter 6. So that is it for this second part of my second Storytime video, everyone. I have read 6 chapters in total of Wallace and Gromit, A Matter of Loaf and Death. And that will be it for this current series of doing some Storytime videos. I will hopefully be back with a new video idea very soon. I will be giving a lot of thinking of what video to do next. But this will be the last Storytime video I'll be doing. Or maybe if I do come back with another one, the next book I will be reading will be my Wallace and Gromit Anorachnophobia book. So for now, I hope you enjoyed this second part of me reading Wallace and Gromit, A Matter of Loaf and Death. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel to keep an eye out for more cracking videos. So for now, this is Oddman Fan 2021, and I'll see you next time.